I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in to Stephen's World TV Talk Radio. I'm your host, Stephen Sindoni. Today, we have a very interesting guest who has a great deal of information to share with us. My guest today is a personal friend as well and fellow researcher, Chris Baird. Chris, I'd like to welcome you to Stephen's World Talk Radio.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the program today. Chris, let's begin our program with you telling our audience who Chris Baird is and what got you started doing the thought provoking research that you'll be sharing with us today.
Well, my name is Chris Baird, and I'm label myself as a Hollow Earth researcher, but I research many different things. And what got me started was just an understanding from a young age that I had more important things to do in life. I didn't know what that would mean, but I was a child who had a very hyperactive imagination, and my brain moved a lot faster than most people's do. And so I spent a lot of my time trying to understand things at a deeper level. Um, Anybody who has ever had that happen would understand that you would be the kid in class who would raise their hand a lot, and eventually that led to other people being jealous in nature of me being smart, and it actually held me back for quite a while in my life as I kind of dumbed myself down to a level to fit into those people around me. But as I became an adult, I realized that, I didn't have that pressure anymore, and it was time to awaken and move back into all of the thinking that I had been doing and to reawaken some of these things that I had shut down. And the more that I awakened these things, the more realizations and memories that I had as I grew older. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
What was the first experience that triggered this epiphany, this aha moment, so to speak, that got you realizing there was more than just the conventional wisdom that you were seeking?
I had a very interesting experience in 2007. In 2004, I had a friend who had shot himself, unfortunately, and he was a very good friend. I had kind of ostracized him because he was a drug addict, a very severe one, and I had moved away from him. But one day I had a very strong feeling, and it was seek Adam, seek Adam. Like and it wasn't so much like the word seek; it was just I felt my friend Adam. And I always had paid attention to those little feelings, but this one I felt overly strongly, and I contacted his grandmother, and I said, "Here's my number. You need to have him get a hold of me right away." And she said, "Well, he doesn't have a phone, but I'll do that." Well, I called a week later, and she said, "Well, he stopped by and left a letter, but I forgot to give him the telephone number." I was very distraught, but of course it was his grandmother, and I said, "Okay, well, just make sure he reaches me." And a week later, I got a call from another friend. "Did you hear what happened to Adam? Adam shot himself, and he's dead." So I was very upset, and I just knew that if I had got a hold of him, that maybe things would have been different. Well, I know they would have been different. He would have known that there was somebody else reaching out to him, that sort of thing, and he wouldn't have felt probably so destitute over what was going on. I also had a strong feeling, and of course I'll never be able to prove this, but that maybe he was forced into doing what he had done over a drug deal gone bad. But what happened in 2007 was I was at a concert, and prior to the concert, I felt really strongly that I would see my friend that night. Again, the same strong anticipation of the feeling of Adam. And I was at the concert. The next thing I knew, light and sound waves went around me, and I wasn't at the concert anymore. I was whisking through space to the center of space. I felt overwhelming peace and warmth and things that I can't explain to people because they're just such strong feelings that they couldn't even imagine it here on Earth. Peace and light and understanding that you've never felt before. And I was landed at a fire at what I will call the center of the universe, and there was millions of people representing stars meditating around this fire. And I was landed behind a man, and he turned, and there was Adam, but not like I'd ever seen him in real life here on Earth. he was glowing, radiant, not strung out on drugs, and he was crying, and I was crying. I was like, Adam, and he's like, yeah, and we danced, and we hugged, and we talked, and then he said, you have to go back. And at that moment, I had this weird feeling like, go back where? I had forgotten about life and pain and sorrow, everything, and I had pictures of my children come into my head, and as that happened, I had an understanding that I had something more important to do and that I was being sent back. And when I arrived back on the planet, I was there and tears were streaming down my face. And Adam had told me when I came there that the reason he had brought me there was so that I could go back and I wouldn't have to worry about him anymore. That he could see that he was fine and that he wasn't in some place like hell, that he was good. And that he knew that I had tried to reach him, but it was too late and there's nothing that I could have done. And so after that moment, and I came back, my world was reawakened. And then there was a second part to that, that about a year later, I went outside and I was looking at the stars, and something interesting happened. I started looking beyond the stars to the grand scale, the largeness of the universe. And when I did that, the whole universe turned around and started looking at me. And I felt so insignificantly teeny tiny and small. And I felt the power and the presence of the whole universe at that moment. And those two things combined changed my life forever and started me looking into the research that I've been doing now.
Well, speaking of the research that you're doing now, what initially triggered your interest that made you begin the research? Was there something that you saw specifically that made you ask the next question?
Well, I started off in the basics of what can I find. I'm not good at reading because I have dyslexia, and so and my mind moves so fast that that's not a good tool or element of teaching for me. So I started looking through, and of course there are some people that would find this source of research interesting, but I started looking through YouTube. And at the time, I had a really strong Christian basis for my religion, and that has changed over time. But I began to look for things that would support the Bible. And so I began looking, and I looked up giant skeletons, because I remember in the story of Noah that it said there were giants in the earth in those days and after, and things like that. So I looked through giant skeletons. I found out some things about a Planet X, and or Nibiru, and some things called the Nephilim and Anunnaki and things like that. And of course, I was all very skeptical. But then one day I came across a big giant skeleton called the Leviathan, and it's supposedly in one of the Arab countries, and it's a skeleton that's about 6 football fields long. And I was really getting interested in that, and I found another video on Moses and the mountain of God being in a different land where it's mentioned in the Bible, and a researcher in the 70s finding this mountain and finding a pyre underneath, and then very close in location finding a granite rock that had been split at the time that Moses would have been around, and water coming out. And I was all very interested in that, and then I bumped into one of your videos on Hollow Earth, and started looking through the Hollow Earth stuff, and another video called Hollow Earth 3D, and then I went through and I listened to the book called The Smoky God, and that kind of turned my world upside down. It was one of those, could this really be true? And when it hit me like, I didn't even have pictures yet, which I'll get into. It hit me like, this makes so much more sense. Because when I was a child, I would lay awake thinking about lights at the North Pole. Where did they come from? More than what, to me, I always felt like NASA was telling us that, that all this magnetism up there caused the northern lights, and that's all that it was. But then I thought, okay, well, wouldn't it be one consistent color? But you see all this beautiful scope of different colors at the North Pole. And so when I found the hollow earth, I also thought about that, and I also thought about weather forming at the poles. And one of the biggest things that always frustrated me in school, and another thing that stuck out in my head, was my science teacher told me that weather formed at the poles, and I had the hardest time understanding how evaporated water would somehow travel all the way up to the poles and stay liquid, even in the cold, until it got to the tip top of the ice-cold pole, and then would suddenly flash freeze in the snow, and then redisperse in the clouds, and then find its way back down to the lower areas and pour snow. You know, it just didn't make any sense to me. And so understanding that the Earth could be hollow with a sun in the center suddenly made it clear to me that as the warm, steamy air would escape through these vents up in the north, that would in turn turn into cloud and flash freeze in our cold outer atmosphere, and then turn into snow cloud and thus disperse in a vortex caused by that wind intaking and outtaking through the holes. I mean, it almost immediately became clear and evident to me. It was like an instant understanding of how the world worked in a better way than what had been explained to me in school. And then what that led to was a almost hurt and frustration that I'd been lied to, and that perhaps my teachers had been lied to, and that this was not taught to me, you know, and it started to change my views of how the world was, and how we had been lied to, not only with the hollow earth, but also in our religion. And it started to make me more open spiritually to other ideas than just Christianity, and it became something where I really wanted to look into it. And then in April 23rd of 2011, I took my sons to the Denver Museum of Nature and Science in Denver, Colorado. And when I went in there, I went to the Space Odyssey Center after going to the Pirates exhibit. It was a free day, and so we went to the Pirates exhibit and then the Space Odyssey Center, and I was going there specifically to look for pole holes or auroras on the different planets. And I was shocked to notice for the first time that there were auroras on the other planets, but of course their pictures were angled to where you couldn't really see a hole. But I had remembered the story about Neptune, that they had taken pictures of the pole, and it was just a story I remembered from back when I was in junior high school, that they had taken a picture of Neptune and it had a hole at the top, and it was unexplained and this and that, and those pictures seem to have disappeared for a while on the internet and everywhere. You just can't find that specific one. But anyways, while I was there, they had a brand new display, and it was a display of the Earth, that they could change from the Earth to the Sun to any of the planets by flipping a switch. And this display of the Earth was showing earthquakes, and the man was doing earthquake here and there, and he paused it because the man wanted to see Alaska. He was from Alaska, and it was way up at the top, and he couldn't see it that good. So the man lowered the projection down to show Alaska.